Hello, January 4th, 2019. This is Everyday Truth. I'm Lisa Chu. Um, I woke up this morning feeling really, again, that pang, that need to dig a little bit deeper beneath the surface to find the truth. And this book really helped me. Um, it's called Coming Home to Myself Reflections for Nurturing a Woman's Body and Soul, co authored by Marion Woodman and Jill Mellick. And so the story of this book for me in my life was 1 year ago when I was just searching for what was next, searching for that deeper truth. And I stumbled upon some words by Marion Woodman quoted somewhere that really, really struck a chord. And so I looked up who she was, and she has an amazing life, Jungian analyst, but this whole life before that led her to that. And then she studied anorexic and bulimic women, and wrote a series of books on the divine feminine, which was such a different read from the quote unquote spiritual community teachings that I had received on divine feminine, which was so she talks about the Black Madonna, the shadow, and the darkness of the and mystery of the feminine as being central to what so many of us in Western culture have been robbed of. And I'm not sure it's just Western culture, but that's her frame. Because when she talks about what we've been robbed of, and I was revisiting that this morning in light of how I was feeling, what it comes down to is perfectionism, and what we have been robbed of as a result of that. And you can look at the origins of that. Why do both men and women have this um, wiring for perfectionism, and how we've spread that around the world, in my opinion, as I look at our second wave of colonialism through the free market. So the reason I was feeling that this morning is some vulnerability and exposure from having sent out all these videos onto my newsletter list, which is over almost 600 people that I've known over different periods of time, and some of whom I don't know at all, that just sort of found my website over the last 8 years. And some met me in person when I was doing events, and all of my events were very much on the side of the light and the positivity. And I don't really think I delved into this truth finding as much in my public workshops. I did it in coaching more. And so I feel exposed, and it's that what I call emotional perfectionism that I subject myself to. If I'm going to lead people or even speak, that I need to have things all together, and I can't appear to be weak in any way. And right in there is a lot of inner critic, right? Like as if emotions equals weak. So that's part of some kind of a cultural meme that I'm not sure exactly the origins of, whether it's a Western or before that. But I just opened to this page. I love to open to this book and just let it fall open on a given day and see what's there, because the way it's written, the story of this book is that Jill Mellick, who is also a Jungian analyst, happens to be based in the Bay Area, also painter and poet, sat with Marion Woodman's writings and sort of took passages and excerpted them as poetry. So it's this kind of, you know, book that reads like poetry, but it really is responding to and extracting from the writings of Marion Woodman. So some of them read as passages from stories, and some are just statements. And I'll just read from the little chapter called Beyond Perfection and Duty. Uh, and as I read that, I want to read the opening to this chapter, which says, "Having high standards and a sense of duty that transcends personal self-interest is laudable. However, when our standards are so high that we deem ourselves unacceptable unless we meet them, we are in trouble. We know, yet forget, that to be human is to be flawed. Even the finest endeavor contains minor imperfections. In some Eastern cultures, certain works of art are deliberately flawed so that the gods will not be angry because an artist is competing with their perfection. Perfectionism and blind duty can ravage a woman's body, spirit, emotions, relationships, self respect, self care, and equanimity. As a goal, perfection is usually lethal because it is never met, and our failure leaves us with the pain of comparison. And doing one's duty is empty and soul withering unless it is fed by love." So many things come up there with me. I'm thinking about Confucian duty and how that was kind of implicitly handed on as this duty of sons and daughters, blind duty, um, and the pursuit of that perfection as a son or daughter. And then in my classical music training, it was totally about perfection. I mean, violin is classic instrument to fuel any tendencies toward perfectionism. So it's a very, very fine line to do that in a healthy way. Um, there's a lot of eating disorders among violinists at the high levels. Um, and of course, in medicine, it attracts certain specialties within medicine, like surgery, especially microsurgery, invites perfectionism. And of course, there's an expectation among the public that doctors be perfect because they've elevated themselves to this godlike stature. So, a couple of little excerpts from this chapter. Just this one sentence I love. Perfection does not allow for feeling. And I'm just relating this to my music experience that so much of the pursuit of perfection, you can hear a lot of young musicians around the world now. Go to YouTube, look at like Korea, China, these little tiny violinists who are technically perfect, but they don't feel what they're playing because they couldn't possibly. Number one, life experience, and number two, just the focus on the technical perfection doesn't leave room for expression of real, flawed, and complex human feeling. So that brings me back to this everything that I'm doing right here in recording these videos as I am. Like, I'm not photoshopping, I'm not like using professional lighting. I'm coming into my office at whatever time of day that I'm ready to do this. I turn on my recording devices and here I am. I haven't gotten in front of the camera in my pajamas yet, but I'm really trying to get a. We need to get away as a society from these studio-based images as the only images that we ever see of human beings. Um, so perfection does not allow for feeling. Perfection is not interested in staying in the body. It wants to fly, wants ideals, wants beauty, wants truth, wants light, and you sure don't get these here. Um, so that's a distinction that I just that's not really talked about a lot, which is some people call it the distinction between spirit and soul. Spirit being the ideal, the truth, the light, the beauty, and then soul being this earthy, bodily substance of our existence, which has that organic, composty feeling to it that's very, very rich and fertile, but in a totally non ideal, non perfect way. And we just, everything about the image world, um, in commercials, marketing, and entertainment is not about that. Um, Perfection massacres the feminine. Our culture pulses to the pressure of perfection. And a lot of these I know are coming from her book, on the stories of women with eating disorders. Fascinating, because of her interest in the narrative, she talked to people and really got inside their stories and dreams and imagery and metaphor around their relationship with father, mother, inside them, and who they were still worshiping and what they were trying to achieve in their eating disorder. And um, that really opened up something for me in terms of a way of understanding. And I think it really is informing my interest in the word trauma, because it occurs to me that that's such a huge basket of a spectrum of experiences. And I think we're using that word. It's funny that people are saying it's a 21st century phenomenon. No, it's as old as time, right? But we're using that term, I think, as a way to decenter from people from the symptoms and the diagnosis, which is where DSM and the medical model have taken us and swung the pendulum too far, and over medicated people, rushing to these diagnoses, and have steered people back to an origin story of, where do these things come from, and how do we have a deeper conversation, a deeper awareness of the interconnectedness of the symptoms, and not to default to saying everything is a social problem and everything is the system and the government that needs to be solved. Let's actually look at the ecosystem of the individual in terms of the events in their lives, the people in their immediate um, circle, and then how those interactions and each individual's behavior, as well as their behavior toward each other, have impacted that person and the people around them. And it becomes this web that keeps going back. As you look at each individual in the web, they have their own story, they have their own events that happened that impacted them and their behavior. So it almost decenters the treatment of the individual and looks at them as part of their own microcosm, which is good, but makes it complex for what we call treatment. When we say mindfulness, when we talk about all these interventions for children and ACEs, what strikes me is, from having been a teacher of young children who are not just, you're never teaching just a child in isolation. You're always teaching a family unit. And so any intervention that you talk about, nutrition, exercise, mindfulness, mental health, healthy relationships, I'm just quoting Nadine Burke-Harris here, those interventions can't just be like, drop your child off for their mindfulness appointment, or let's do a mindfulness class for your child. It's like, let's get the entire family and everyone who's interacting at home with this child into this mindfulness class, because those are all people that are having an impact and modeling behavior for the child, and they all deserve to have this intervention. They all can be exercising together. They're all likely eating the same meals. So when you prescribe a nutrition program for a child, you're really telling the parent to eat and behave differently. And there's so many factors that go into nutrition, just from my personal experience, how hard it is to actually make the time, the room, and the budget to eat real food. Um, and I live in an area where it's very, very accessible. So I feel that gratitude every single time I eat a salad. That that's a huge privilege on this planet to be able to have access to lettuce that's good and organic and tastes like anything. So, um, imperfection. I love this kind of mini story in a poem that's continuing in this Beyond Perfection and Beauty section of the book of Marion Woodman's Coming Home to Myself book. Um, this is about the mother of perfection. And so I read this metaphorically, and you can also project any kind of things that occur to you as you hear it. She has foolproof recipes for everything. If strictly followed, and to follow is to follow strictly, they guarantee success. Her real world is the world of things, things that work efficiently. She is impatient of error, having no room for it. There's no need for it. Anyone learning under her jurisdiction will be oriented from the start to objects and goals clearly defined. Her daughter knows herself as a thing, thinks of herself as an object designed for high efficiency. She does not know her mother's knowledge is not wisdom, is without human meaning, is without personal love. Her daughter has no standpoint of her own. There is no danger of her opening to her own weeping. There is no danger of her singing her own song. So this strikes me on many, many levels. As even as I read it out loud, more was opening to me in terms of how, as a culture, we seek these gurus, whether it's a brand, um, a religion, an advice, self-help guru that has a doctor that has foolproof recipes that, if strictly followed, guarantee success. How many books and scripts and marketing messages are written that way, if not explicitly, subliminally? That in marketing, we're trying to convince you that if you just follow these strict rules, you will, I guarantee success and money back guarantee, right? As long as you do this. And that's what sells. So perfection, buying into perfection sells, denial sells, but the messy truth has to be given away for free. And it's a gift at this point. This is the gift economy of what we're really, really hungry for is still not valued by the economic system that we have. And we're doing it. I'm doing this um, to stay alive in my soul, to maintain sovereignty of um, that sense of having a standpoint of my own and risking that I open into my own weeping, risking that I may sing my own song. And so that's a really different way of even thinking about it, because I've marketed programs or workshops that are called Find Your Own Song, because you have to, in the way I interpreted it through my perfectionist lens, you have to guarantee some kind of result because we're all like, oh, there's somebody actually watching right now. Nice. you have to guarantee a result because we're all so programmed to be these efficient machines that we only have a sense of self-worth when we're a thing. And so all of this messy imperfection and all of this sort of um, meandering, pulsating aliveness of human existence has no place in our commercial and increasingly efficient world of interactions. And that's the pain that that I'm seeing being expressed, and that we're all sort of yearning and striving in our different ways to repair. And I loved this other quote um, from the introduction to this book, which talks about what healing is. So this helped me too, because I really have a lot of inner critic, self judgment stuff that comes up when I talk about this kind of truth, when I admit kind of difficulty or take stands on my own anger or sadness about stuff, because they're imperfect. They don't fit into that perfection model of the women and men in my life who modeled what it means to be perfect and how I'm supposed to present myself in the world. And so turning on this camera and admitting the truth of my experience, the humanity of it, brings up a lot of stuff. So one of the self criticisms that I have is that, um, get over it already. Just stop wallowing in your own self pity, which I know it's not self pity, but I still hear that voice that comes up that tries to stop me. And that's how I was feeling waking up this morning, like, oh crap, like all these people are going to be like, what's wrong with her? Um, so this paragraph in this book, I think, is a great way to think about it. Healing does not mean wallowing in or identifying with injury, nor does it mean defensive inaction, which I now recognize that inner critic, the one that says get over it already, is a defense. Um, it means having the courage to see, acknowledge, grieve, and repair the holes ourselves with, if we are fortunate, loving help from others. That's kind of bold to say that we're repairing the holes ourselves, because right now all the lingo around relational trauma healing is saying that if a trauma has occurred in relation, then it must be healed in relation. And so that's sort of the rationale behind getting help, counseling or going to a group, talking to someone. And I really do believe that, and I've shared before that the group experience really, really helped me to be able to speak into a room of real people and to hear their stories right away in response and to have that exchange and bouncing off of each other. It was key. It really opened a huge door for me. That's why I can be right here now. But ultimately, the work, the seeing inside, the excavating, the the real, like, kind of searching and feeling into what is stirred and what's happening and what wants to be spoken is something only you can do. And I think that one some of the problems with some therapy models are that they set up an expectation where it's just like, okay, this process is going to do something for me. And I think the relationship of a therapist that you really connect with does do something. It takes time to invest in that relationship and to find it. Um, but you know, there's ways. I guess I'm saying, like, there's so many different ways. And part of the sickness of perfection and this rigidity of following rules and being things is that we fall into line like soldiers doing things the same way as everyone around us. And whatever we've defined as our everyone, we sort of conform. So, finding your own way, following your own meandering path, and also knowing you're not alone and connecting with ideas and people and resources that help, but creating that space to touch in with yourself. That's what this is all about. Thanks for listening.